Welcome to this YSL Report Builder tutorial. In this video we'll cover the lookup, LookupSet and MultiLookup functions. The video is all about looking up values between datasets in Report Builder, and we'll start with a quick example of the basic lookup function to return a descriptive piece of text based on the value of a key or ID column. We'll explain the necessity of converting data types to make sure your lookups are looking at the same types of data between the datasets. We'll also explain how you can check if a value is found and what to do if not. We'll then move on to the LookupSet function to return multiple values and explain how you can join the contents of the array returned into a single readable string. Finally, we'll use the MultiLookup function to look up multiple values and return multiple values, and in doing so we'll explain how you can split a single string into an array of multiple values which can then be looked up. So quite a few interesting techniques in use here. Let's get started. To get started, you'll need a couple of things. Firstly, a copy of the file which you can download using the link in the video description. Secondly, a copy of the YSL Movies database. If you don't already have that installed, you can use this video which explains exactly how to get it set up, and there's a link in that video's description to download any required files. Assuming you've done both of those things, I'm going to right-click on the file that I've downloaded and choose to extract all. I'll check this box to show me the extracted files when I click the Extract button, and when I do that I'll see a single text file. I'm going to double-click to open that in Notepad, and it simply contains some XML to generate a basic data set that we're going to import into a brand new Report Builder report. So I'll head over to Report Builder, where I've got a brand new blank report waiting, and I'm going to right-click on the Data Sources folder and choose Add Data Source. I'll call this data source XML data, and then I'll choose to use an embedded connection, and I'll change the connection type from SQL Server to XML. When I click OK, I can then right-click on that data source and choose to add a data set. I'll call this dataset Films, and then all I'm going to do is copy all of the text from the text file I've opened. So I'll click into Notepad, press Ctrl A to select everything, Ctrl C to copy everything, head back to my dataset window, paste what I've copied into the query box, and then click OK. And that will generate a basic dataset for me. I'll use that just to show a basic table, so I'm going to tidy up my report a little bit first by deleting the title text box and then removing the page footer. Then I'm going to insert a table into the report body, and I'm going to assign the title and the Studio ID column from that dataset. Just to avoid the font rendering bug, I'm going to highlight all the cells in the table and then switch from the default font to any other font, and then back to the default font, or try to do that at least. I'll get there eventually. And then I'll do some basic formatting for the column headers, a tiny bit of column width changing, and then run the report just to see what we get. So the dataset contains a list of 10 films and the ID numbers for some other properties such as the studio, the director, and the genres to which the films belong. What I'd like to do is take these ID numbers and convert them into some meaningful, readable information, and we're going to do that by looking up the ID numbers in another table in the movies database and return the value of another column. To do that, what we'll do is head back to the design view, and then I'm going to create a new data source which allows me to connect to the movies database. So I'm going to right-click Data Sources and choose Add Data Source. I'll call this data source Movies. Use an embedded connection. It will be a SQL Server connection this time. I'll click the Build button. Then in the server name box, type in a full stop and a backslash to shortcut to my local host, followed by the name of the instance of SQL Server I'm using, which is SQL 2017. I can then use the drop-down list towards the bottom of the dialog box to select my movies database. Click OK a couple of times, and there's my movies data source created. The dataset I'm going to create now is going to contain the ID number of the studio that we want to look up, as well as the name of the studio that we then want to return. So I'm going to right-click on the movies data source and choose to add a dataset to it. I'll call this one Studios, and then I'll use the query designer to help me quickly build the select statement, expand the tables folder, followed by Studio, and then select the 2 columns that belong to it. I'll click OK a couple of times, and that's my second dataset created. Now I'd like to create an expression that will return the studio name next to each film based on the studio ID. Ordinarily, when we want to add calculated information to a table or a dataset, we right-click on the dataset name and choose Add Calculated Field. Unfortunately, the function we're going to use here, called lookup, isn't allowed to be used in a calculated field, so we have to resort to adding an ad hoc expression in the table itself. If I right-click into the empty text box next door to Studio ID, I can choose to create an expression, and then from the Common Functions category, in the Miscellaneous section, I'll find the Lookup function. I'll double-click to insert its name. There are 4 things I need to fill in for the Lookup function. The first thing I need to enter is the name of the column which contains the key value that I'm trying to look up. So for each film, the studio ID contains the key that I want to look up. So I want to insert the studio ID column first. I'll head over to the fields list and then double click studio ID to have that inserted. I'll then type in a comma, and the second thing I need to fill in is the name of the column in the other dataset which contains the matching values. So as it turns out, the name of that column is exactly the same. It's called Studio ID in the Studios table. I can double click the Studio ID column again from my current dataset just to write in the exact same field name. If I then type in a comma, the third thing I need to fill in is the name of the column in the other dataset which contains the value that I want to return. In this case, that's the name of the studio in a column called Studio. Now you'll notice that I can't select the studio column from this list because this list contains only columns from the films dataset. I could cheat, I suppose. I could insert the studio ID column again and then just edit the text so that it said studio. Alternatively, if I wanted to see the list of fields in the Studios dataset, I can head to the Datasets category and then select Studios, and I'll see a list of all of the columns that belong to it. Slightly annoyingly, these are wrapped up in some aggregate functions, sum for Studio ID and first for Studio. I'm going to double click the first Studio, and then I'm going to have to edit a little bit the code that's been entered. The first function I don't want to use here, so I'm going to take the word first and open up and the round brackets that have been opened up and delete that so that the third parameter after the comma says fields studio.value. You'll see because I inserted a function, an aggregate function, it's also added in a comma and then the name of the data set to which that column belongs. We don't need to delete that because that's the 4th parameter of the lookup function. The lookup function needs to know which data set these 2 columns belong to. So I can leave studios in double quotes and the closed round bracket exactly as it is. I'll just tidy up the layout of this by taking each argument onto a separate line and then typing in some spaces at the beginning to indent the code a little, just to make it a little easier to read and to understand what's going on. So the first column again, the first parameter is the name of the column in this dataset containing the keys we want to look up. The second parameter is the name of the column in the other dataset which contains the matching values. The third parameter is the name of the column in the other dataset which contains the information we want to return. And the 4th and final parameter is the string name of the dataset which contains these 2 columns. So having done that, I'm going to click OK. Unfortunately, when we run this, this isn't going to work. I'm going to return an error for all 10 rows, as you can see. So the next step, of course, is to fix that problem. Now, the reason the lookup function has returned an error is because the data types of the 2 Studio ID columns in our datasets don't match. In the films dataset, the Studio ID is returned as text or string data, and you might be able to tell that based on the left alignment of the information in that cell. In the Studios dataset, the Studio ID is an integer. That's the underlying data type of the column in the SQL Server database. So we need to convert either one or the other into the appropriate type. And for this example, we're going to convert the Studio ID of the films dataset into a number or an integer. So to do that, I can head back to the design view and I can right click into the text box which contains the expression and choose to view the expression. The first parameter is the one that contains a reference to the Studio ID column in the films dataset. I'm going to wrap the cint function around that field reference. So cint, open some round brackets, and then close the round brackets just before the comma. So if I just quickly zoom in there so you can see that a little more clearly. Cint is one of the conversion functions in Report Builder or Visual Basic. If you open up the Common Functions category, there is a conversion section, and you'll see a list of all the functions in there that allow you to convert one data type into another. So having done that, if I click OK, I'll change the width of the column a little so hopefully the studio names will read on a single line, and then run the report. And there we go, we've returned the name of the studio for each film. Now let's create another example to return the name of the director for each film. To do that, we'll head back to the design view, and we'll need to create a new dataset which returns the director ID and the director's name. So I'll right click on my movie's data source and choose to add a dataset. I'll call this one Directors, and then I'll use the Query Designer to help me build it. From the Tables folder, I'll expand the Director table, and then I'm just going to select the Director ID and the full name columns. Having done that, I can click OK a couple of times, and then I want to add a couple of extra columns to my table. So I'm going to drag in the Director ID field so we can see what's in there, and then I'm going to right click and insert a new column to the right of the table, and then I'll right click into that cell and choose Expression. So again, we're going to use a lookup function, so I can go to my Common Functions category, head down to the Miscellaneous section and double click the lookup function. I want to look up the value of the director ID in the film's dataset, and I know that I need to convert the director ID from a piece of text or a string into a number. So I'm going to insert the cint function from the Conversion Functions category. So I can double click cint and then head back to the fields list and insert the director ID field. I can then close the round brackets and type in a comma. The next thing I need to do is refer to the column in the director's dataset which contains the matching value. So that's going to be director ID. And again, I can cheat here just by double clicking on the director ID field in the film's dataset. The third column I need to insert is the name of the field containing the director's name. That's the one that I want to return. So I'm going to head back to my Datasets category, choose the director's dataset, and double click First Full Name. I then know that I need to get rid of the first function. That's not important in this example, and it will in fact break the entire thing. So let's get rid of the first function and the open round brackets. But we need to leave in the name of the dataset in double quotes and the closed round brackets at the end. Again, a tiny bit of tidying up just to make it a little more readable. You can do this as you go along, by the way, as well, if you prefer. I just find it easier to go through all the double clicking to get everything inserted before tidying up the results at the end. So there we go. There's the second example, very much the same as the first, or very similar to the first. We're looking for the director ID in the current dataset, trying to match that with the director ID in the second dataset, return the full name from the second dataset, and that's the second dataset's name. So having done that, we can click OK a couple of times, or once I should say, and then run the report, and we'll now end up with the name of the director for most of our films. Now, it's fairly obvious that not every film has returned a director name, and the reason for that is that these director IDs from 509 onwards don't actually exist in the director table of the movie's database. So the lookup function returns null or nothing in Report Builder terms. Now, it might be nice to check if that lookup function returns nothing and replace the empty cell with a message like no director found or something along those lines. To do that, let's head back to the design view, and I can right click on the text box which contains that expression and choose to view the expression. And then I want to wrap an if function around the lookup function to check if the result of that is nothing. So I can say IIF, open some round brackets. And again, if you wanted to insert that function rather than type it in, you can go to the Common Functions Program Flow category to insert if. To test whether something is nothing in Report Builder, there are two ways to do it. We could wrap the lookup function inside the isNothing function. Alternatively, you can write the phrase isNothing after the function has returned a value. So a little more similar to the isNull operator in SQL. Either will work, it's entirely up to you. As I've bothered to type that in already. I'll leave mine as is nothing. Then I need to type in a comma, and on the next line I'm going to type in what I want to return if the lookup function doesn't give me anything. So in some double quotes I'll type in a phrase such as no director found, and then close the double quotes, followed by another comma, and then I need to state what to return if the lookup function does return a value. Annoyingly, that means I've got to basically replicate the entire lookup function. So rather than type all that in again, I'm just going to copy and paste it. So everything from the word lookup all the way through to the closed round bracket after the name of the dataset. I'll copy that with Control and C and then paste it with Control V. I finally need to close an extra set of round brackets at the end to take into account the extra opened round bracket for the if function. And then I can click OK, run the report again, and I'll see now, rather than having empty cells, I've got a phrase which says no director found. So the lookup function is useful when there's a one-to-one relationship between the value you're looking up and the one you want to return. So each film has one studio which made it, and each film has one director who directed it. But what if the relationship was a little more complex than that? What if we wanted to, say, for example, return all of the films that each studio has made? So 20th Century Fox, it's one studio, but it has 2 films, so there's a one-to-many relationship. Marvel Entertainment has 4 in this list. So let's have a look at how we can use a different function to return multiple values for a single key. Let's head back to the design view, and I'm going to insert a new table below the existing one. And in that table, I'm going to insert the studio and studio ID columns from the studio table. I'll just change the font formatting to make sure that I still actually see all the text, so I don't run into that silly font display bug. And then I'm just going to change some basic formatting of the column headers to tidy that up a little bit. So what I want to do now is write a function in this, or write an expression in this final column, which returns all of the films for that one single studio. To do this, let's right-click into the blank cell in the table and choose to add an expression. I'll head to the Common Functions category, Miscellaneous, and this time I'm going to insert the LookupSet function. LookupSet is very similar to lookup, but instead of returning a single value, it returns a set of values. The order of the parameters is still the same, so I need to start by referring to the field in this dataset that contains the key values I want to look up. So from the fields list, I can insert Studio ID. I can then type in a comma, and I need to insert the name of the column in the second dataset, which contains matches for those key values. So again, that's going to be the Studio ID column in the films dataset. I still need to be careful about making sure the data types match. So I'm going to type in the cint function and some open round brackets, and then just insert the Studio ID column again, and then close the round brackets. Another comma, and then the third parameter is the name of the column containing the values I want to return. So if I head to my Datasets category, select Films, and then double-click First Title. Of course, I don't need the first function, so I'm going to select and then delete the word first and the open round brackets there. But the third parameter is just the name of the column containing the information I want to return. The fourth parameter again is the name of the dataset that contains the title and Studio ID columns, so I can leave that exactly as it is. Just a bit of tidying up to make it look a little more readable. And then we can check if this works. Oh, hint by the way, this isn't actually going to work the first time, and there's a good reason for it, but if I just quickly show you how the function looks, or how the expression looks at this point. So if we click OK to create that calculation, try to run that one, we're going to return an error for every single studio. The reason for it is that the LookupSet function doesn't return just a single value. The whole point of it is it returns multiple values. And I can't simply return a set of multiple values into a single text box in a table. So let's head back to the design view and look at how we can solve this problem. If you've watched the previous video in this series, you'll be familiar with working with arrays in Report Builder. and in particular how you can take the individual contents of an array and build them into a single value. And that's the same approach we're going to take here. Let's right click on the text box which contains the expression and choose to view the expression builder again. Just to show you the function we're going to use, I'll go to the common functions category and choose text, and then I'm going to select the join function. The join function has two parameters, the first one being the thing which contains the array, which contains all of the individual values, and then the second parameter is which delimiter character you want to put in between each element. So I want to wrap the current LookupSet function up in the join function, so I can click just after the equal sign and then double click the join function. So the array of values I want to join together is the results returned by the LookupSet function. I can then click after the closed round brackets there and type in a comma. I could use a literal string to join my various bits of text together, my various film names. So for example, I could type in some double quotes. I could type in a comma and a space character. So each film name would be in one long string with commas and spaces between each film name. Rather than doing that, I'd like to put each film name on a separate line. So I'm going to use a control character, a constant called VBCRLF, which stands for Visual Basic Carriage Return Line Feed, just in case you were wondering. So that's a control character, a constant that will insert a new line essentially after each film's name. I can then close the round brackets at the end of all that, and we haven't added much to it, just join and open round brackets before LookupSet, and then comma VBCRLF, close round brackets at the end. If I click OK, and then just change the width of that column so it's a little more easy to read, when I run the report this time, I'll find that for studios which have some matching films, each of their film names is on a separate line. If I scroll down a little further, I'll find Marvel Entertainment with its 4 films. So there we go, that's working quite nicely. Again, it would be nice to be able to replace the empty cells in this table with a message, similar to the thing we did with no director found in the previous example. Let's just have a look at what happens if we try to take the same approach here. Let's head back to the design view, and I'm going to right click onto the cell containing the expression and choose expression. I'll click just after the equals operator here, and I want to check if the lookup set returns nothing, basically. So I'm just going to give myself a blank line. I'm going to take the join function down to the next line, and then click just after the equals operator. Then I'm going to go to common functions, program flow, and double click the if function. I then want to try to return the results of my LookupSet function. So I'm going to just copy that entire thing. So everything from LookupSet to the closed round brackets at the end just there. Okay, so now I want to check if that is nothing in the same way we did with our director's example earlier. So I can say is nothing, followed by a comma. And then on the next line, I'll type in the phrase I want to use. So in some double quotes, no films found, close the double quotes, another comma, and then right at the very end of the entire thing, after the final join function and the VBCRLF, I want to close an extra set of round brackets to go along with the open round brackets for the if function. Let's click OK and see what happens when we run that. Apparently, absolutely nothing at all. That hasn't worked in the slightest, has it? The reason for that is because the LookupSet function, even if there are no elements in the array returned by the LookupSet function, the LookupSet function still technically returns an array, so it doesn't return nothing. So I can't check if the array is nothing because it actually exists. An alternative approach, we could find out how many items the array contains. If the number of items in the array is 0, then I want to display my message. So let's head back to the design view, and I'm going to go back to the exact same expression. I'll right click on the text box and choose expression. And then, rather than checking is nothing, let's get rid of that part first. I want to test a property of the array returned by the LookupSet function. So just after the closed round brackets there, I'm going to type in a full stop, and then look for the property called length. Length is a property of an array which tells you how many items it contains. If that is equal to 0, then I want to show no films found. Otherwise, I want to join all the results into that single continuous string and show that in the cell. So just to zoom in so you can see that part, dot length equals 0. Let's have a look at the effect of that if I click OK and then run the report again. Finally, now I've got the message I want. When the length of the array is 0, it says no films found. For the final example in this video, I'd like to return a list of genres for each film. So to do that, let's head back to the design view and we'll create the genres lookup table first. I'll right click on my movie's data source and choose to add a data set, and then I'll call this one genres, and then from the query designer button down at the bottom, we can expand the tables folder, followed by the genre table, and select both columns, genre ID and genre. I'll click OK a couple of times, and then I'm going to insert from my films dataset. I want to drag the genre IDs column into the first table. So let's drag genre IDs to the end. Just to have a look at what that looks like if I run the report, you'll see that the genre IDs column doesn't just contain a single ID like director and studio, it contains a comma-separated list of all the genres that the film belongs to. So I've got a couple of problems here. First of all, I'm going to be returning multiple values. I'm going to be returning an array. Fortunately, we know how to handle that part with the join function. We've just done it. The other problem I've got, though, is that I need to pass in multiple IDs in the first place to have the lookup performed over multiple rows in the genres lookup table. So that requires a different function to either of the two we've used so far. We're going to use the MultiLookup function. So let's head back to the design view and we can insert a new column into the table at the right hand side. And then in that new column, let's right click in the empty cell and choose to create an expression. I'll head to the common functions miscellaneous category again and find the MultiLookup function. If I double click the MultiLookup function, roughly speaking, the parameters are the same. I need to specify the values I want to look up from the current dataset. So that's going to be the genre IDs. Then I need to point to the corresponding column in a second dataset, which will be genre ID, followed by the name of the column I want to return a value from, which will be genre, and then the name of the dataset, which contains those final two columns. The problem I've got though initially is how I get the MultiLookup function to look at multiple values. So we've just used the join function to build multiple values from a single array into a single continuous string. What we're going to do here is use the opposite function, the split function, to take our single comma-separated string and split it into an array of multiple values. So let's find the split function in the text category. We can scroll downwards and find the split function. I'll double click to insert that, then head back to my fields list and insert the genre ID field first, the genre IDs field first. What I then need to do is specify which character in the continuous complete string separates each individual value. So if I type in a comma, the literal character which separates each of our genre IDs is a comma. So in some double quotes, type in a comma and then close the round brackets. So that part will essentially perform a lookup for each individual genre ID in the string of genre IDs. I'll type in a comma again, and then I need to refer to the genre ID column in my genres dataset. I'll cheat a little bit here. I'll double click genre IDs and then just modify the name of it. I'll take away the letter S from the end there. Then a comma after value, and I want to refer to the name of the genre column in my genres dataset. So I'll head to the datasets category, select genres and double click first genre. I can get rid of the first function again in the open round brackets, and we're almost there. There are two more things we need to do. First of all, we need to make sure that the data types of the lookup columns match, and currently they don't. So the genre IDs in the films dataset are text, whereas the one in the genres dataset is a number. Now annoyingly, I can't get at the individual values of the array that we've returned to convert each one into a number, and I can't simply convert the entire string into a number before I split it. That won't work. So what I need to do here is make sure the genre ID column from the genres dataset is converted into the same type as the films dataset, and that type is a string. So if you wanted to find your conversion functions category, you'll find there's a CSTR function. So just in front of the field's genre ID.value, I'm going to insert the CSTR or CString function, and then close a set of round brackets just after the dot value there. At this point, I'm just going to take things onto multiple different lines to make it a little easier to read. And then we'll add in the one final thing that we need to do. So these are the 4 separate arguments we've passed in to the MultiLookup function: a split value, an array containing the individual values we want to look up, the corresponding field in the other dataset containing the matching values converted to a string, the value or the column that we want to return the values from, and then the name of the dataset. The final problem we need to solve is that the MultiLookup function, just like LookupSet, returns an array, and I can't display its results in a single cell. I need to join all the returned values together into a single string. So again, we'll use the join function to do that. I'll type in the word join in front of MultiLookup and open up some round brackets. Then at the end of the expression, I'll type in a comma, and then I can choose which character to separate the individual genres with. Rather than using a new line this time, I'm going to use a comma and a space character, and then I can close the round brackets, and that's the entire expression created. So having done that, let's click OK, and then we'll make sure the column's wide enough to display our list of all the genres that the film has, and then give the report a quick run and see the result. So there we go. Each individual genre listed out in a single continuous string based on the list of genre IDs. So we've seen a few useful techniques there for creating lookups between different datasets when it's not possible to include everything in one single dataset. Hope you found a few of those things useful or interesting at least. Thanks for watching. See you next time.